Millions of renters across the United Kingdom could currently be receiving the wrong amount of housing support, and in many cases they have absolutely no idea that this is even happening to them right now. Today we are going to break down exactly how your housing benefit or your universal credit housing element is actually calculated, why so many renters end up receiving the wrong figure, and precisely how you can check your own payment properly. Let us start with the basics, because understanding how this benefit works is the first step toward understanding whether your own payment is actually correct or not. For private renters, the amount of support you can receive is capped by something called the Local Housing Allowance, which is usually shortened to just LHA in most official documents and guidance. Local housing allowance rates are set by the Valuation Office Agency, and they are based on the 30th percentile of local market rents within your specific area, known officially as a broad rental market area. A broad rental market area, often shortened to BRMA, is essentially a zone where someone could reasonably be expected to live, taking into account nearby shops, schools, transport links, and other everyday services. Because rents vary enormously across the country, LHA rates also vary enormously depending on exactly where you live, and even a short distance can sometimes place you in a completely different BRMA with a different rate. One of the most important facts to understand right now is that local housing allowance rates were frozen back at April 2024 levels, and current guidance confirms they are set to remain frozen until at least April 2027. This freeze matters enormously because rents in the private sector have continued rising steadily since then, which means the gap between what LHA actually covers and what landlords are genuinely charging has been growing wider and wider. According to research from the Housing Charity Crisis, fewer than 3 in every 100 privately rented properties in England are now considered affordable for someone relying on housing benefit or the equivalent universal credit housing element. That figure has fallen sharply from around 12 in every 100 properties back in the 2021 to 2022 period, showing just how quickly this affordability gap has widened in a relatively short space of time. This growing gap is one major reason so many renters feel like something must be wrong with their payment, when in some cases the frustrating truth is simply that the frozen rate no longer reflects real-world rental costs. However, that is not the whole story, because there are also several very specific and very common calculation errors that genuinely do cause renters to receive an incorrect amount through no fault of the frozen rate itself. Let us walk through the most common reasons a renter might actually be receiving the wrong amount, starting with one of the most frequently misunderstood parts of the entire system, which is bedroom entitlement. Local housing allowance is broken down into several different bedroom categories, and the category you are placed into has a direct and significant impact on the maximum amount you are able to receive each week. The categories generally include a shared accommodation rate, a one-bedroom rate, a two-bedroom rate, a two-bedroom rate, a three-bedroom rate, and a four-bedroom rate, which represents the maximum size that will ever be covered under LHA rules. The shared accommodation rate typically applies to single people under the age of 35 who do not have children living with them, and this rate is usually significantly lower than the standard one-bedroom rate available to other claimants. A surprisingly common mistake happens when someone under the age of 35 is mistakenly assessed using the higher one-bedroom rate instead of the correct shared accommodation rate, or the other way around, when they should actually qualify for an exemption. There are specific exemptions to the shared accommodation rate rule, including certain care leavers, people who have experienced domestic abuse, and some individuals who are considered to be at a higher risk within shared housing situations. If any of these exemptions apply to your situation and they have not been properly recorded on your claim, you could be receiving a significantly lower amount than you are actually entitled to under the current rules. Another extremely common source of confusion involves exactly how many bedrooms a household is entitled to in the first place, since this depends on the number and ages of the people actually living in that household. Generally speaking, you can usually claim one bedroom for yourself and your partner if you have one bedroom for each additional adult, and shared bedrooms for children depending on their age and gender under the relevant rules. If your household composition has changed recently, for example, if a child has had a birthday that pushes them into a different age bracket, or if someone has moved out, your bedroom entitlement could have changed without your payment being updated to match. This is one of the single most common reasons that renters end up receiving an Incorrect amount, simply because a change in household composition was never properly reported or properly reassessed by the relevant department. Another major factor that catches many renters completely off guard is something called a non-dependent deduction, which is an amount taken off your benefit if another adult lives in your household alongside you. These other adults, often grown-up children, other family members, or friends, sharing the property, are called non-dependents, and the rules assume they are contributing something toward the household rent. Here is the part that surprises a lot of people, because a non-dependent deduction can still be applied even if that other adult does not actually give you any money at all toward the rent or household bills. The exact amount deducted depends on the non-dependent's own income, and if their circumstances change, for example, if they lose a job or start earning more, your deduction amount should be reassessed and updated accordingly. If a non-dependent deduction on your claim has not been updated to reflect a change in that person's income or employment situation, you could easily be losing money each week that you are actually still entitled to receive. Another area worth checking carefully involves your correct broad rental market area, since if you have moved home recently, even a relatively short distance, you might now fall under a completely different BRMA with a different applicable rate. Sometimes when someone moves, their claim is not properly updated to reflect the new BRMA, which means they could still be receiving a rate based on their old address rather than their current one. This kind of address-related error can work in either direction, meaning you could be receiving too little support if your new area has a higher rate, or you could risk being asked to repay money if your new area actually has a lower rate. It is also worth understanding an important point that a lot of renters misunderstand, which is that local housing allowance represents a maximum cap rather than a guaranteed amount that everyone automatically receives in full. If your actual rent is lower than the LHA rate for your area and bedroom category your benefit will generally be based on, your real rent, not automatically bumped up to the full maximum LHA figure. On the other hand, if your rent is higher than the LHA cap for your area, you will typically need to cover that shortfall yourself, since the benefit will not stretch beyond the maximum rate set for your specific category. Understanding this distinction matters because some renters assume they are automatically entitled to the full LHA figure regardless of their actual rent, which is simply not how the calculation genuinely works. Another factor that can significantly affect your final payment is something known as the benefit cap, which limits the total amount of benefit a working age household can receive across several different benefits combined. If your total benefits, including your housing support, tax credits, and certain other payments, add up to more than the relevant cap for your household type, your housing payment specifically can be reduced to bring you back under that limit. Certain households are exempt from the benefit cap entirely, including those where someone receives a qualifying disability benefit. So it is worth checking whether an exemption might apply to your specific situation. It is also important to understand that the system itself has changed quite significantly over recent years, and this affects who can even claim which particular benefit going forward from this point onward. In the current system, new claims for the older legacy benefit, known simply as housing benefit, are now largely restricted to specific groups, rather than being generally available to any private renter on a low income. Generally speaking, new housing benefit claims are now mainly limited to people who have reached state pension age, people living in temporary accommodation provided by their local council, and people living in specified supported accommodation with care needs. If you do not fall into one of those specific categories, you will generally need to claim help with your housing costs through the housing element of universal credit instead of through the older legacy housing benefit system. The good news here is that the underlying calculation rules for the universal credit housing element are very similar to the older housing benefit rules, including the same local housing allowance caps and the same general bedroom entitlement principles described earlier. Because so many working age renters have now moved across to universal credit, mistakes can also happen during that transition itself, particularly around how housing costs are calculated within the very first assessment period. If your universal credit housing element seems unusually low compared to what you expected, it is worth checking whether your reported rent, your bedroom entitlement, and your household details were all carried across accurately during that transition process. Savings and income also play an important role in determining your final entitlement, since having savings above certain thresholds can reduce or even completely remove your eligibility for housing-related support altogether. For most means tested support, including housing costs, having savings above £16,000 generally means you will not be eligible to receive this kind of help at all under the current rules. For universal credit specifically, savings between £6,000 and £16,000 can reduce your overall payment gradually, so if your savings have changed recently, this could genuinely be affecting your final housing figure. Given everything we have covered so far, let us now walk through exactly how you can practically check whether your own current payment is actually correct or possibly wrong in some way. The very first step is to find the official local housing allowance rate for your specific area and your correct bedroom category, which you can do directly through the official government website using your postcode. Once you know the correct maximum rate for your area and bedroom size, compare that figure against what you are actually currently receiving, keeping in mind that your real rent may be lower than that maximum figure. Next, think carefully about your current household composition, including anyone who has moved in or moved out recently, and consider whether that change has actually been properly reported and reflected in your claim. If a non-dependent lives with you, check whether their current income situation matches what is recorded on your claim, since an outdated income figure could easily mean an incorrect deduction is being applied. If you have moved address recently, double-check that your claim reflects your current broad rental market area correctly, rather than still being based on wherever you used to live before that move. If you believe your bedroom entitlement might be incorrect, for example due to a child's recent birthday or a change in who is currently living in your household, this is worth raising directly with your council or with the Department for Work and Pensions. If you discover that you have genuinely been receiving too little support, you may be entitled to receive a backdated payment covering at least part of the period during which the error actually occurred. On the other hand, if you discover that you have actually been receiving too much support due to an unreported change, it is important to report this honestly and promptly, since you may otherwise be asked to repay that money later. Being proactive and reporting a change as soon as it happens is always the safer approach, since this generally leads to a much smoother and much less stressful outcome than waiting for an error to be discovered later. It is also worth being aware that scammers sometimes take advantage of confusing benefits-related news. Exactly like this, sending fake messages pretending to be from your council or from the Department for Work and Pensions. A genuine message about your housing benefit or your universal credit housing element will never ask you to click a suspicious link or provide your full bank details through an unexpected text message or email. If you ever receive a message like this, the safest approach is to contact your council or the Department for Work and Pensions directly using a phone number you already know to be correct, rather than one provided within that message. To bring everything together, remember that local housing allowance represents a maximum cap based on your area and bedroom entitlement, and it has been frozen since April 2024, with rates expected to remain frozen until at least April 2027. Remember that your bedroom entitlement depends on your exact household composition, and changes like a child's birthday or someone moving in or out can affect this entitlement without your payment automatically being updated. Remember that non-dependent deductions can apply even when that person does not actually contribute any money, and that these deductions should be reviewed whenever that person's own income situation changes. Remember that most working-age renters now need to claim housing costs through universal credit rather than the older legacy housing benefit system, unless they fall into one of the specific exempt categories described earlier. And finally, remember that checking your own details today, comparing them carefully against the official rates for your area, could genuinely reveal whether you are one of the many renters currently receiving the wrong amount. If you found this breakdown genuinely useful, please consider giving it a like, since that really does help more renters find clear and accurate information rather than confusing or misleading headlines online. Please also consider subscribing to this channel, since we will continue covering updates related to the Department for Work and Pensions, universal credit, housing benefit, and wider housing-related news as things continue to develop further. If you have checked your own details and found something that looks incorrect, or if you have any questions about your own specific situation, feel free to leave a comment below and we will do our best to help. Thank you so much for watching all the way through this video, and we will see you again very soon with more clear and carefully checked updates on this ongoing topic. Let us go a little deeper into a few specific questions that come up again and again whenever this particular topic gets discussed, since a handful of common worries tend to repeat themselves. Cross comments and messages. One frequently asked question is whether moving to a slightly cheaper area automatically means your local housing allowance rate will also drop by exactly the same proportion as your actual rent has dropped? The answer is not necessarily, because LHA rates are set independently for each broad rental market area based on local market data, so two areas with similar average rents can still have noticeably different LHA figures. Another common question involves what happens if you are currently living in a property that has more bedrooms than your household is officially entitled to under the relevant local housing allowance rules. In this situation, your benefit will typically be capped at the rate for your correct entitlement, meaning you may need to cover part of the rent yourself. If you choose to remain in a larger property than you are assessed for, some renters in this exact situation eventually decide to move to a smaller property that better matches their official entitlement, simply to avoid an ongoing gap between their actual rent and the maximum benefit they are able to receive. Other renters choose to remain where they are and accept covering the shortfall themselves, particularly if moving would be disruptive for children attending a nearby school or for other important personal circumstances. Either choice is completely valid, but it is important to understand clearly which situation you are actually in, since this directly explains why your payment might be lower than the rent you are currently paying. Another question people frequently ask is what they should do if they genuinely believe a decision about their housing costs is incorrect, even after checking all of the details we have already covered together. If you believe a decision is wrong, you generally have the right to ask for what is called a mandatory reconsideration, which means asking the relevant department to formally look at your case again. If you remain unhappy with the outcome of that mandatory reconsideration, you generally then have the right to appeal that decision further to an independent tribunal that is completely separate from the Department for Work and Pensions itself. This appeal process exists specifically to make sure that renters have a genuine opportunity to challenge a decision they believe is incorrect, rather than simply having to accept whatever figure they were originally given. It is worth keeping any relevant paperwork, such as your tenancy agreement, proof of rent payments, and any letters relating to your claim, since this kind of documentation can be extremely helpful if you ever need to challenge a decision. Another question that comes up often relates to how quickly a change in circumstances actually needs to be reported once something changes within your household or your personal financial situation. Generally speaking, changes should be reported as promptly as possible, ideally within a matter of days rather than weeks, since delays in reporting can sometimes lead to either an underpayment or an overpayment building up over time. If you are ever unsure whether something counts as a reportable change, it is always safer to report it anyway and let the relevant department confirm whether it actually affects your claim, rather than assuming it does not matter. People also frequently ask whether receiving other benefits alongside their housing support could be affecting their overall payment in ways they might not immediately understand or expect. As mentioned earlier, the benefit cap can reduce your housing payment specifically if your total combined benefits exceed a certain threshold for your particular household type and circumstances. It is worth checking directly with your counsel or with the Department for Work and Pensions whether the benefit cap might be affecting your specific household, particularly if you have several children or live in a higher rent area. Another frequently asked question involves whether renters in social housing, meaning council or housing association properties, are affected by the same local housing allowance rules that apply to private renters in the same way. Social housing tenants are actually assessed slightly differently under rules sometimes referred to informally as the bedroom tax, which can reduce support if a social housing tenant is considered to be under-occupying their property. Under those separate rules, having one spare bedroom can lead to a percentage reduction in support, and having two or more spare bedrooms can lead to an even larger percentage reduction being applied. If you live in social housing and you believe your bedroom entitlement has been calculated incorrectly, the same general principle applies, meaning it is worth checking your household composition carefully against the official rules. Let us also spend a moment talking through some practical organizational habits that can genuinely help you avoid ending up in this exact situation in the first place, rather than only discovering a problem after it has already been affecting your payments for some time. 1. Simple habit worth building is setting a reminder every few months to revisit your claim details and confirm that your household composition, your address, and your reported income are all still accurate and up to date. Another useful habit is keeping a simple folder, whether physical or digital, containing your tenancy agreement, recent rent statements, and any letters you receive relating to your housing benefit or Your universal credit claim. Having this information organized and easily accessible makes it much faster to check your details whenever you want. 2. And it also makes any future conversation with your counsel or the Department for Work and Pensions considerably smoother. If you share your home with a non-dependent, it is worth having an honest conversation with them periodically about their current income situation, since this directly affects the deduction being applied to your own claim. Many renters simply are not aware that they need to actively report a non-dependent's change in income themselves, since counsels and the Department for Work and Pensions do not automatically know about these changes without being told. If you support an elderly relative or a family member who might struggle to navigate this system alone, consider sitting down with them periodically to review their own housing support details together in a similar way. Older renters, particularly those who have reached state pension age and are claiming the legacy housing benefit directly through their local council, can sometimes find this system especially confusing to navigate without some extra support. Taking the time to help a relative check their bedroom entitlement, their reported rent, and their household composition could genuinely make a meaningful difference to the amount of support they are actually receiving each week. It is also worth remembering that housing costs and rental markets can change relatively quickly in some areas, particularly in cities experiencing rapid population growth or significant new housing development within a relatively short period of time. Even though local housing allowance rates themselves are currently frozen until at least April 2027, your own personal circumstances, including your address, your household, and your income, can still change at any point regardless of that wider freeze. This means that even during a period where the underlying rates are not changing, your own individual entitlement absolutely can still change, which is exactly why regularly reviewing your own details remains so important. If you are currently searching for a new rental property and you want to understand roughly what kind of support you might be entitled to before signing a tenancy agreement, checking the official rate for your intended area in advance is highly recommended. This kind of advanced checking can help you avoid signing an agreement for a property where the rent significantly exceeds what your housing support will actually cover, which could otherwise create financial pressure down the line. Landlords themselves are also increasingly required to understand these rules more clearly, particularly following recent legal changes that make it unlawful for landlords to blanket refuse tenants purely on the basis that they receive benefits. Because of this, more landlords than before may now be willing to consider renters relying on housing benefit or universal credit, which makes understanding your own correct entitlement even more genuinely useful and relevant. To close things out today, this entire topic really does come down to a small number of clear and genuinely practical points that are worth remembering going forward from here. Your housing support is capped by the local housing allowance rate for your specific area and bedroom entitlement, and that maximum rate has been frozen since April 2024 and is expected to remain frozen until April 2027. Your actual payment depends heavily on your real rent, your correct bedroom entitlement based on your household composition, and any non-dependent deductions that should reflect the current income of anyone else living with you. Errors commonly happen when a house move, a change in household composition, or a change in a non-dependent's income is not properly reported and reflected within your ongoing claim. Checking these details today, comparing them against the official rates published for your area, and reporting any changes promptly are the most effective steps you can take to make sure your payment is genuinely correct. Thank you again for staying with us throughout this entire breakdown, and please remember to look after your own financial situation just as carefully as you look after everything else in your daily life. One final point worth mentioning involves how councils and the Department for Work and Pensions sometimes carry out periodic reviews of existing claims, checking household details, income, and circumstances even when nothing has been actively reported as changed by the claimant. If you are contacted for one of these periodic reviews, it is worth treating it as a genuinely useful opportunity to double-check that everything on your claim remains accurate, rather than viewing it purely as an inconvenience or an intrusion. Responding promptly and providing any requested evidence clearly and completely can help these routine reviews move smoothly without unnecessary delays affecting your ongoing payments while the review itself is being carried out. It is also worth understanding that different councils across the country can sometimes have slightly different processing times and slightly different local procedures, even though the underlying national rules and rates remain broadly the same everywhere. If you have recently moved between different council areas, it is worth allowing a little extra time for your new local council to fully process your claim, while also keeping copies of everything you submitted during that transition. Finally, if you ever feel genuinely confused or overwhelmed by any part of this system, remember that free and independent advice is available through organizations such as Citizens Advice, who can help explain your specific situation in plain and simple terms. Local citizens' advice offices, along with various housing charities across the country, can often help you understand your rights, check your entitlement, and even assist with challenging a decision if you believe it is genuinely incorrect. Taking advantage of this kind of free support is never something to feel embarrassed about, since navigating housing benefit rules can genuinely be confusing even for people who deal with paperwork and official systems regularly in other areas of their life. It is also worth remembering that guidance and rates connected to this topic can occasionally be reviewed or clarified further by the government as circumstances continue to develop throughout the year, so checking the official website periodically remains a genuinely sensible habit to build, staying a little bit informed on an ongoing basis, rather than only checking your details once and then forgetting about the topic entirely, is generally the safest long-term approach for any renter currently relying on housing-related support of any kind. If you know a friend, a neighbor, or a family member who rents their home and might also be affected by any of the specific issues we have discussed together throughout this video, please do consider sharing this information with them directly today. Small pieces of accurate information like this genuinely do make a real difference, especially during a period where rents continue rising while support levels remain frozen, so please help this reach as many renters as possible today. Before we finish completely, let us briefly recap the exact sequence of practical steps one more time, since repetition really does help this information stick firmly in your mind after watching. Step 1 involves finding the correct official local housing allowance rate for your exact postcode and your correct bedroom category using the official government website directly. Step 2 involves comparing that official rate against your actual current rent, remembering that your real payment should reflect your genuine rent rather than automatically defaulting to the maximum figure available. Step 3 involves reviewing your household composition carefully, checking for anything like a recent house move, a change in who lives with you, or a change in a non-dependent's reported income situation. Step 4 involves reporting any changes you identify as promptly as possible, either through your council directly or through your online universal credit journal, depending on which system currently applies to your particular claim. Step 5 involves keeping clear records of everything you submit, along with any responses you receive, so that you have solid supporting evidence available if you ever need to challenge a decision later on. Following these 5 simple steps consistently, ideally reviewing them every few months, gives you the very best chance of making sure your housing support genuinely remains accurate and correct going forward from today onward. Thank you once again for taking the time to watch this entire breakdown today, and please remember that a few minutes spent checking your own details now could genuinely save you real money. Going forward, take care of your finances, take care of your household, and we will see you again very soon in the next video with more clear and accurate updates on this ongoing topic. Stay informed, stay proactive, and always double check your details. YouTube thumbnail 16:9 dramatic red and black color grade with vignette lighting a young renter in their late 20s generic fictional.